A man and a woman together for life provides some very natural, strong natural benefits. Number one, they're not going to get sexually transmitted diseases and die out. Even today with all of our so-called technology, it's the only way to assure that outcome with certainty. And then number two, any child that they have is going to have the optimum chance of development and of survival and of reproduction. And you can't replace that.
Welcome to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. It's a real joy to talk to a guest we've spoken to before, Professor Paul Sullins from the US. Professor Paul Sullins, an expert in family outcomes for different family types. We're going to talk to him about what research he's been working on, some other things that have been taking place around the country at the same time, and just have a general catch up. It's going to be a couple of hot potatoes, so brace yourself, but all being well, it'll be done with the best intentions at heart and from an evidence base. Paul, how lovely to talk to you.
In honor of this occasion, I brewed myself a cup of Yorkshire tea. Oh,
Nice. Well, I got a can of Diet Coke, so I suppose
oh,
that's like commensurate, isn't it? Really?
yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Nothing more American than Diet Coke.
Absolutely.
You know,
Especially in these heady days, right? I should have a Big Mac next door to it, shouldn't I? Really. So, I want to talk to you about your research today. What we've spoken before about your research around child outcomes for different family types, but you've progressed that, haven't you? So how have you progressed that?
that would be based on my 2020 study that examined very closely outcomes by family type and found that on a range of indicators, children turned out worse um, when they were not in the care of either of their biological parents. So it's
Right.
important to make that distinction.
Yep. Yep.
What makes the difference is not whether the parents are same-sex attracted or not. I don't even have a measure of that, but what makes a difference is whether the child is in the care of both their biological mother and father, not just a man and a woman, but their own mother and father. And then if you step away from that to lesser forms that approximate that less and less, so you go back, if maybe it's a stepfather, so it's not their biological father, but at least there's a father, but then outcomes decline. And if it goes to a single parent, outcomes decline even further. And if it goes to where there is no biological parent in the home, the outcomes are far worse.
Right.
Now, the only family type that consistently has no biological parents in the home would be same-sex families. So that's why the outcomes are worse there. They tend to be worse with same-sex married families than same-sex cohabiting families. I suspect that's because these married families last longer, and so children are in the care of those two individuals longer.
Because stability is very important.
Since then, I haven't done anything more with outcomes with for children with same-sex parents, partly because it's really difficult to get data on that. If you try to find a sample large enough from scratch for that, it's very expensive, difficult to do. Regner has found that out. He tried to do that, did a stand-up job, but he didn't really get very many cases. He underestimated the effort that it would take. He got, I think, only 5 or 10 children.
Tell us a little bit about, because you proved Regnerus right recently in a particular area. Tell us a little bit about that.
An independent analysis that reanalyzed his data proved him right in a very strong way. So he found that those who had, even for a short time, lived with a mother who then came out as lesbian, or a father who did so came out as gay, um, had lower outcomes across the board. So that study was roundly criticized, um, vehemently criticized, but on the level of scholarly analysis, um, there were two main criticisms. One was that um, he did not account for family transitions in his study. He could have, but he didn't. And so a reanalysis that looks at the amount of transitions that each child suffered finds that that explains, well, the analysis claimed that it explained all of the outcomes and therefore rendered the presence of same-sex parents,
Irrelevant. Yep.
yes,
Yep.
invalid. I was going, but yes, irrelevant. And then the second critique was that he classified his parents in such a wide fashion, general fashion, that it didn't really actually relate to children that were in families actually with same-sex parents. And that's the problem of a few cases. And that is a genuine problem, I think, with his analysis. So those two critiques uh, kind of rebutted Regner's findings in the minds of many social scientists. The reanalysis found that neither of those critiques explained away all of the difference for having same-sex parents. And in fact, the first one explains away almost none of it. And the second one explains away part of it, but it's a matter of how you're going to classify different relationships and
Mm.
different persons.
Right.
Um, so what happened was that a new technique, which is one of these AI high volume computing possibilities that we have nowadays, said that we're not just gonna look at the kinds of analyses that Regnerus did or that his critics did. We're going to look at all possible analyses of these data. And you can do that. I mean, it was like several million different possibilities, but they cranked them through these supercomputers and um, found that in Regnerus's study, um, no matter what analysis they used, his findings came out positive. The difference between the difference in child outcomes between same-sex parents and man-woman parents persisted no matter how they looked at it. Well,
Mm.
that's a
Mm.
really remarkable and amazing finding. They in the same book, they look at several other studies that are controversial, and for none of the other studies does that hold true. Most of them are to some extent invalidated by this more rigorous analysis. So it was remarkable that these findings persist. And it's remarkable in part it as a credit to Regner's integrity and rigor of his analysis, but in larger part, in my view, because there is something real there. There's a real social fact that we're observing, that this is not just some result of income or education or some kind of social differences between these groups, but that there's a very fundamental difference between having same-sex parents and having man-woman parents.
And that's above and beyond the fact that one of the parents may well have been biologically related to the child and the other one may not have. Yep. So it's beyond the same thing heterosexual. It's because there's a same sex attracted element or right. That's very interesting. And is it more exaggerated with two females or two males or
From my 2020 analysis of the NHIS, this is the Lineker Quarterly study called The Case for Mom and Dad. And so I looked at the difference between uh, two women or two men or single women, single men. And the worst case was two women. Two men, outcomes are a little better. Um, and then single female, and then single male, better outcomes. So if you have a single parent, it's better to have a single father than a single mother. If you have two same-sex parents, it's better to have uh, gay male parents than two lesbian parents. And this is contrary to all of the social
yeah.
science wisdom
Both
because,
of those are contrary to what you might think.
yeah,
Mm.
right. So what it says to me is how important fathers are to children. We think of mothers as more attentive, more caring, fathers distant. But in fact, in the psychological development of children, and the social development of children. Fathers are extremely important. More than I think than even the fathers themselves know. Uh, and um, and so that's just a finding in the data. It comes out very clearly in that analysis and in that study. I don't have a theory to say why that is the case, except that I think that fathers are fundamental to psychic development. Now, if you think of what happens when someone develops same-sex attraction and becomes gay, that also confirms the importance of fathers because what causes in most cases,
Mm.
and I want to say in men, but probably also in women, the development of same-sex attraction is an inattentive or a rejecting father. Uh, it combined often with an overly protective and or dominating mother. So if you have a helicopter mother and you have a father who's distant or uncaring, and particularly if they then split up, right? And you lose the father, essentially. You're a candidate for the development of same-sex attraction, for attempting in psychological ways that I can't fully elaborate. Um, the attempt to join with someone of the same sex to be able to recover that masculinity if you're a man, or that male approval if you're a female, in your own adult sexual relationships.
So I want to get why this is important, Paul, because a lot of people would say, well, you're just being unnecessarily homophobic for no reason. And you think, hold on, first of all, homophobia is an irrational fear or hatred of a whole group of people. Well, from what I can tell, you're literally quoting data, so it's neither of those two things. But the other thing is, so in our country, in the UK, adoption agencies, for example, we know that a rising number of adoptees are going to same-sex parents. And in fact, there is an orchestrated effort to increase the number. It's currently at 20%, and to increase the number further. And this is on the back of, well, people are born this way. It's not, it's just one of those things. They're born that way. They should have the same rights and opportunities as everybody else. But actually what you're saying is maybe we should be looking at this from the point of view, first of all, of the child outcome. And really you want to put children with couples that, on a population basis, ideally are going to bring about the best outcome for the child. But also then you've introduced this thing about a lot of our legislation, so same-sex marriage was brought in on that basis. Well, people are born this way. And you're saying, well, hold on, that doesn't seem to be the case, and the science doesn't seem to indicate that. So maybe the things that follow on from that, a right to have children when you can't create them biologically, well, maybe that isn't quite as strong as we might think. And I'm approaching this, of course, from the point of view of marriage being between a man and a woman, because I think it's categorically different. The thing that a man and a woman can do cannot be done by a man and a man and a woman and a woman. And you're saying the data, not only around conception, but also around raising children, supports that too, which is very interesting.
Yeah, right. And of course, I'll be derided as homophobic because
Well, yeah,
there's no real response rationally to the claim that I'm making. So
yeah,
that
yeah,
I have to be denigrated or derided as
yeah, yeah,
somehow
yeah,
being hateful.
yeah.
But in fact, none of that's true, and I think it's kind of silly to engage that too much. Um, Nothing that I've said criticizes the fundamental parenting abilities of gay and lesbian persons. If two persons with same-sex attraction stay together in a man-woman marriage and raise their children, those children, as far as I know, are going to turn out as well or better as any other children. So there's nothing about being gay in that sense that deprives a child of its optimum well-being. What deprives the child is the absence of one or both of their biological parents. And that logically can never happen when that child is in the care of two men, because two men can never naturally conceive a child. Two women can never naturally conceive a child. Now, that's just basic biological natural fact. And if I'm hateful for saying that, then you can call me hateful. But nonetheless, it turns out to be true. A lot of people who say true things throughout history have been called hateful for doing
Yeah,
so.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
the earth goes around the sun, and
yeah,
little
yeah, yeah,
basic
yeah,
facts
yeah,
that
yeah.
we just have to accept as life, right? So I just think of it as something very basic in human biology and
Yeah.
human reality.
Beyond that, you seem, I mean, Capernaum aside, you seem to be saying that actually, even so, for adoption, for example, on a population basis, a man, the outcomes for a man and a woman as adopted parents is better than a man or a woman and a woman.
Generally speaking, the point with adoption is that the only person who should have rights in adoption is the child who
Yeah,
needs
yeah,
adopting. And the interests of that child, usually in the legal realm, the best interest of that child should be the prevailing and controlling factor. So if you've got a child who needs adopting, let's say you've got a 1-year-old or an infant who needs adopting, um, and you have a range of persons who are prospects for adopting that child. So you have to ask, should you place that child with um, gay parents or with man-woman parents? Well, knowing nothing else, it's it's obvious. The persons who have same-sex attraction or who are gay form a tiny portion of the population. They're at most 5%. And I'm exaggerating.
yeah,
In,
yeah,
in
yeah,
most
yeah,
population
yeah, yeah.
studies, it's less than 2%. 1.8% is the common figure. So the chances are 50 to 1 that that child is not same-sex attracted, even if you think that it's an inborn trait, right? So, granting arguendo that it's inborn, it's only inborn for 2% of the population. So the chances are very large that that child is not same-sex attracted. Now, one of the principles for the best interest of the child is to try to place that child with parents that are similar to that child. So you place them with people of the same uh, racial profile and the same class profile and very similar because when children grow up, if they're too different from their parents, it's more difficult for them. So where would you logically place that child? Would you place them with the man-woman parent? uh, for the odds are 50 to 1 that they're going to have
Mm, mm.
similar sexual orientation to their parents, or would you place them with the gay parents? Well, I mean, obviously, if you're thinking about it rationally, you're going to choose for the man-woman parents. But that doesn't, to me, that does not say that you should absolutely in every case rule out the possibility of gay parents. You may have a gay parents in which one of the parents is related to the child, is an uncle or a cousin. Children tend to do better when they're placed with family, even distant family. So I could see a justification for that in that case. You have to weigh out the pros and the cons. The problem is that it's politically incorrect to even acknowledge that there are any cons with regard to same-sex parents.
And to have a policy which says we want to increase the number of same sex parents that are adopting children, well, that in and of itself is seems to me to be directly against what the data would suggest.
Yes. Well, and the other issue is most same-sex parent adoptions, at least in the United States and most other countries that I've looked at, are not two-parent adoptions, but they're one single-parent adoptions. So in the United States, they say, well, gay persons adopt way more kids. But if you look at those adoptions, a large portion, the majority of the gay parent adoptions are a case where the child is the biological child of one of the partners, and the other partner wants to adopt the child so as to have a legal parental connection to that child. That's a very different matter than having two gay men or two gay women uh, setting out to jointly adopt somebody else's child.
And I get so the other side of the argument is, well, these people can't have their own children. So surely we should be allowing them to adopt more children because, that's their only route, if you like. And that would be the other side's argument, I guess.
Yeah, well, that would make sense if there were no other alternative, or if there were other other good reasons for that particular child to go with that gay couple. I wouldn't object to that. I don't know what the social welfare system for children is like in the UK, but in the US, I think it's probably a worse alternative than the probably the worst
Well,
kind of
yeah,
parents
it's
almost that you can
yeah.
have.
I mean, it's just rough. I think, generally
Yeah.
speaking, in terms of Walter Shum. I mean, I think his book, Same-Sex Parenting Research, highlighted that the probability of a child growing up with same-sex parents being same-sex attracted was much higher than the probability of now that in, again, that seems to be another argument against the born this way thing, because it's like, well, how would that work? It's kind of, well, and the response to that is, well, actually, they're, for some reason able to choose children which are more. I don't understand it, but it seems to me to be again, a funny old argument, really.
If you reject the biological argument for the development of same-sex attraction, and you accept the psychodynamic argument, which I think is much more well attested, it makes perfect sense that if you put a child with two men or two women, they're going to have a, a imbalance of parental affection according to sex. If a child is, and of course, no one's ever studied this much. I've studied it but haven't published it. But you have to make a distinction between a male child that's put with two women and a female child put with two women and a male child put with two men and a female child put with two men, and which one comes out better. The Putting a boy in the care of two women isn't going to help that boy at certain crucial parts of his development to develop a male masculine identity. They're not going to be able to help that boy to develop. Um, and Putting a girl with two men, you have the same problem the other way. A child needs a parent of their own sex in order to have certain developmental factors when they get into adolescence. But even more than that, um, strong research shows that children need a particular um, um, association with their mother, um, that they develop an attachment to their mother. And this is the theory of attachment, John Bowlby's theory that comes out of the 1960s, that places the root of psychodynamic development for children, for infants particularly, in a strong bonding attachment to their mother. We have a lot of research. It's well known on this fact. And in recent years, that research has been affirmed and specified in very strong ways. Now, I don't know if you looked at my the lecture I gave in Finland. It's called "Why True Marriage Cannot Be Gay," and I don't look at any of the so-called gay parenting research in that. All I do is look at the research that affirms the need for children to have both a mother and a father for certain aspects of their psychic development. So a child through the age of 1 year bonds very strongly with their mother, not so much with their father. Um, Now, later on, it becomes important for them also to have contact with a father for their cognitive development. But let's just take that child for the first year. You take that child and put it with two men, they're not going to be able to have that attachment with a mother. And so that's going to limit their psychic development. In that lecture, I described the NICU research, where they did research in neonatal infant care units back in the 1980s to see if children benefited just by being held by a woman
Wow.
in their first few weeks of life, right? Something so basic and so
Yeah.
essential to
Yeah.
have a female. And they found that if a female, a nurse usually, would hold that child for 15 minutes, twice a day, that's all, that those children developed much more rapidly than the children who didn't have that. And that became now standard protocol because it shortened the hospital stays for those children by several days. Well,
Really?
that saves a lot of money.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
So
yeah.
that became,
Wow.
and so they found out there's strong
Wow.
research that affirms this. I
Yeah,
would say hundreds of studies, but maybe it's only scores of studies, but it's a lot of
yeah,
studies. And they've
yeah,
done now
yeah,
studies comparing being held by
yeah,
their own mother or some other woman. Well, it's better if
yeah,
they're held by their own mother.
yeah,
So we have lots of data that prove the natural
yeah.
necessity of an infant child for their own mother. They took
Mm,
gauze pads and had the smell of another woman, the smell of their own mother. They overwhelmingly went toward the smell of their own mother. Children are
yeah,
attracted to their own mother, and we know that the mother's own breast milk naturally develops antibodies specific to that child
mm,
that comes out of the combined environment, the biological environment of the mother and the child, and so helps to protect that child against
mm.
diseases at a much higher rate. Well, you tell me how a child with two men can have that benefit. The World
Yeah.
Health Organization recommends that children be fed exclusively breast milk the first 6 months of life. How can that happen if that
Mm,
child is in the care of two men? So
mm.
I think it's a violation of the rights of that child to take them from their mother coercively and put them in the care of two men. But that happens with every child who's the product of a surrogate arrangement
Well,
and many
surrogacy, of
children.
course, that's a whole. I mean, adoption, it's making the best of a poor situation, isn't it? But
Exactly.
surrogacy is
Exactly.
intentionally depriving a child
That's
of one of their
exactly right.
parents, if not both.
And and so putting a child, whatever state they're in, in the care of two men, really harms that child. We're not making this up. It really harms that child. It's something we should not be doing.
And we have proposals again to expand surrogacy rights and abilities in the UK, or towards the American model, which is just, again, it's just not child centered. And the thing is, marriage is the best technology we've got for the best social technology for keeping a man and a woman together. Nothing else. Nothing else comes out the same, which is why we are, aside from the religious argument, which is valid in and of itself, but purely from a non-religious secular point of view, marriage is obviously and clearly the best technology for keeping men and women together, which is clearly the best thing for raising the best version of the next generation. I
That's right.
think the
And not
problem.
only in our culture, but every culture ever
Yeah,
known
yeah, right. Yeah,
has
this is not
developed
new.
something
This is,
like
yeah, yeah,
marriage.
yeah,
It's not specific to any religion at all,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because a man and a woman together for life provides some very natural, strong natural benefits. Number one, they're not going to get sexually transmitted diseases and die out. It's even today with all of our so-called technology, it's the only way to assure that outcome with certainty. And then number two, any child that they have is going to have the optimum chance of development and of survival and of reproduction. And you can't replace that.
And no, I mean, before anybody, you're going to get people that say, oh, well, that's, women become slaves. But no one's saying you have to stay in an abusive relationship. Blah, no one's saying that at all. But actually, as far as is humanly possible, we should be promoting the thing which brings about the best result for the largest amount of people, which is clearly that. And the problem we've got from a policy perspective in the UK, from an equality rights perspective, Paul, is that we've backed ourselves into a legislative corner where we can no longer promote man-woman marriage because it's exclusionary, it's discriminatory. And so the best we can do is say nothing and pretend that everything's equal and everything's the same. And everybody who knows, the elites who are coming up with these laws all get married and do their best to stay married. And the people who are just listening to the crazy rhetoric are the people who are losing out at the socioeconomic level of society where they can really do with the thing that gives them better outcomes. Yeah, well, I mean,
So
of course, the whole trans debate is interesting because the recent data in the US showing that a decrease by half of the number of young people identifying as trans although the lesbian and gay data seems to have held fairly flat
Yeah,
over a similar period.
yeah. And probably they're going to find a similar decline in young people identifying as gay and lesbian. So again, it calls into question the whole idea of this being some sort of innate trait. It's more like a social contagion or something.
That's well, we know from other studies that adolescent sexuality can be influenced by environments. We know that there are studies that have proved that very conclusively. So, I mean, that doesn't in itself mean that people necessarily choose, because if you experience whatever environmental factors when you're a very little child, well, you don't necessarily choose your response to that, do you?
I was raised speaking the English language.
Yeah,
'Cause my parents
yeah.
did.
You didn't
Doesn't
choose
mean
it.
I
Yeah,
have an English
yeah,
gene.
yeah,
I could
yeah.
have spoken some other language. In fact, if I wanted to work hard enough, I could, you know, convert to speak some other language.
Yeah, like
Uh,
English instead of American.
yes, exactly. Well, now that would be very hard to.
Yeah, absolutely right.
We could do it. People do
Yeah,
move and study and
yeah,
change their language
yeah.
orientation, we might say.
Which brings us on to the hottest of hottest potatoes, which is, again, something in the UK we're talking about, which is banning so called conversion therapy. So we already have a scenario over here where all of our regulated therapeutic bodies are unable to talk to anybody who says they've got unwanted same sex or alternative sex desires. They know we won't talk to you about that at all. Which seem, if you've got a situation, and of course if you then ban anything which is considered as conversion therapy, that then comes outside of the therapy area into churches, into homes, into parents. If you can do nothing but affirm, otherwise you're breaking the law, which again it's almost like a complete, reversal of the situation.
It's like totalitarianism.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a
yeah.
banning of the freedom of
Yeah,
people to follow their own
yeah.
convictions.
Especially when the evidence is very clear that a lot of people change their minds for whatever reason, get over childhood experiences, whatever, and lead very fruitful lives and very happy lives. And some decide to remain in their set orientation, as they would see it. And in a liberal democracy, actually, we should allow for both.
We're going to reveal some of the first findings from our survey next week. That surveys 180 some people from around the world who have moved away from gay. We call it leaving pride behind, and have gone on to some other life and identity. They're certainly not all the same, but the vast majority of them report that they have effectively diminished or ceased same-sex attraction, certainly many more, even same-sex behavior. So the idea that people can't change is simply false. It's simply
Yeah,
wrong. There is
yeah,
evidence out
yeah,
there, but it's like if you're going to ban people engaged in therapy, then you're also going to not have any qualms about banning reports about people who succeed from that therapy. And I've had some of the strongest censorship of my work in this area from sources in the UK that just want to retract for no particular reason. I just republished, thank the Lord, a study of of men who had um, changed their sexual orientation to some extent through therapy. This study was published by a journal based in London, and then about 2 years after publication, some woke critic pointed out what the study concluded, and they retracted it for no particular reason, for nonsense reasons. So we have been able to republish that, and so that's back out in the public sphere, and able to people are able to find that and to know about that.
Good for you. And let me reiterate, we live in we don't live in a theocracy. And some people would argue, in fact, even if we did, whether or not that kind of lifestyle would be acceptable, especially in the Church of England. But we don't live in a theocracy. We live in a liberal democracy, both of us, in fact. And we believe that people should be free to live their lives. The problem comes in when actually some of those people, certainly not all, most just want to get on with their lives, but some of them say, well, actually, no, you have to change the way you think, you have to change what you affirm, and actually we want to convince your children of this too. And you think, hold on, the evidence really does point in a very different direction, and before we influence children with this, we just need to be honest about the evidence. Yep. And to react appropriately, honest and open about the evidence. And if the evidence points in a different direction, fine. But it clearly doesn't at the moment.
Well, I think we need to be consistent. If we're going to be a free liberal democracy, then we have to affirm the freedom of people to choose to live as LGBT and to pursue LGBT relationships if they choose. But by the same token, we have to affirm the freedom of people not to do that, to desist from doing that if that's what they choose to do. Those two things seem to go together. Now, in the United States, we have a case before the Supreme Court on this topic. And we are confident, we're hopeful that the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees freedom of speech, will cover and protect therapists when they're talking to people about whatever particular goals that they want to set in therapy. The thing that is often not talked about is the harm for people who are denied therapy to help them change sexual orientation. And I recently published in, I think it's Public Discourse, a article on sexual orientation therapy, portraying some of the evidence from studies of people who want to change sexual orientation, who are strongly religiously motivated to do so, but go to a therapist who says, "No, I'm sorry, you can't change. You just got to accept
Mm.
being gay." And
Mm.
that drives some of them to
Mm.
think about suicide
Yeah, right.
and into difficult
Yeah.
straits. And so the same harm that the LGBT activists are saying will come about if people have to undergo conversion therapy actually does come about if people have to undergo so-called gay affirmative therapy and do not have that option. So I think there is a massive blindness in understanding or relating to people who really are disturbed by the idea of having to live a life that is at odds with their religious convictions, with their relationship with God in many cases. And people who have a strong, active relationship with God that prohibits same-sex behavior are not going to easily give in to the idea of living and practicing same-sex behavior. They're going to be deeply disturbed by that, some of them to the point of considering suicide.
Which is awful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye, Tony.
Bye now.